Have you ever had one of those moments in life when everything you believed about a situation simply collapsed like a house of cards? Well, that's exactly what happened to me on a Tuesday morning that started like any other but ended in a way I could never have imagined. And it all began with a complaint from my neighbor. I was having coffee when I heard the doorbell ringing insistently. It was 7:30 in the morning, and any civilized person knows that's not visiting hours. When I opened the door, I was faced with two men in suits, badges in hand, with that serious expression that only government officials on duty can have. "Good morning, sir. We're from municipal inspection. We received a complaint about illegal construction at this address." My heart raced. Not because I was doing something wrong, at least that's what I thought, but because any self-respecting Brazilian knows that inspector visits are never good news. They showed me the complaint. Construction of a small annex in the back of my house, without permits, without licenses, without anything. The complainant? My dear neighbor, Mrs. Marlene, the same one I had been politely greeting for over 5 years. What left me perplexed wasn't the complaint itself, but the information that was there, highlighted with a red pen. Construction in area that doesn't belong to the property owner. I read it 2-3 times. What do you mean, doesn't belong to the owner? I had been living in that house for 8 years, had the deed, had everything in order. Or at least that's what I thought. The inspectors, with that efficiency typical of those who have seen it all, explained that I would have to present all the property documentation, including the complete topographic survey of the property. Sir, the problem isn't just the lack of permits. According to the complaint, you're building on land that isn't yours. At that moment, I felt the ground open up beneath my feet. What do you mean? It wasn't mine. I ran after my documents like a possessed man. Deed, property registration, property tax, everything I had religiously kept since I bought the house. But there was a problem. I had never done a complete topographic survey. Who does that when buying a house, right? We trust in good faith and the documentation that's there, and that's it. Big mistake. I hired a surveyor the same day. The man arrived with his equipment, did all the measurements, checked the markers, and after 2 hours of intensive work, called me to see the result. When he unrolled the plan on my kitchen table, I almost fainted. "Sir, are you sure you only have the deed for this house?" I confirmed, not understanding where he was going with this. "Because according to my measurements and comparing with the deed you showed me, you don't just own this house. You own this entire lot here." And he pointed to an area that included not only my house, not only the place where I was building the annex, but also Mrs. Marlene's entire property. All of it. Her house, her yard, the garden she tended with such care, everything was within the boundaries of my property. I was silent for about 5 minutes, processing that information. How was this possible? How could I own a lot and not know it for 8 years? And more importantly, how had Mrs. Marlene been living on land that was mine all this time? The surveyor, seeing my shocked expression, explained that this is more common than you'd imagine. "Sir, often people buy houses without doing the complete survey. They trust the current occupation, the walls that are already there, and end up not discovering the true boundaries of the property." He continued, "In your case, sir, the deed is clear. This lot was divided irregularly decades ago, probably by the former owner, without proper registration at the registry office. You bought the entire lot, but only occupy part of it." At that moment I had 2 simultaneous reactions. Immense relief because I wasn't building on someone else's land, and terrible nervousness because I would have to give this news to Mrs. Marlene. After 3 days gathering courage and consulting a lawyer, I decided to talk to Mrs. Marlene. It wasn't going to be easy. I knew that. How do you approach a 68-year-old person and say, "Look, Mrs. Marlene, that house of yours where you've lived for 15 years, actually the land is mine. There's no etiquette manual for this type of situation." I knocked on her door on a Thursday afternoon. She received me with that unfriendly look I was already expecting. "Ah, it's you who's building without a license. I heard the inspectors went there. So have you resolved your irregular situation?" Her tone was of someone savoring victory, someone who had done the right thing by reporting the irresponsible neighbor. I took a deep breath. "Mrs. Marlene, we need to talk. The case is more complicated than you imagine." I showed her the topographic plan, the documents, the deed. I explained as calmly as possible that according to the survey, I was the legal owner of that entire lot, including the house where she lived. Her reaction was predictable, and at the same time, heartbreaking. First came disbelief. This can't be right. I've lived here for 15 years. I pay my taxes. I have all the house documents. Then came anger. You're trying to deceive me, to get me out of my house. And finally, real concern. But then I'll have to leave here? Where will I go? I tried to calm her down, explained that it wasn't my intention to harm her, that I had also discovered all this by chance. But the truth is that the situation was created, and it wasn't going to be simple to resolve. She had rights as a good faith possessor for 15 years. I had rights as the legal owner. It was the kind of mess that only Brazilian justice could untangle. From that day on, the neighborhood climate changed completely. Mrs. Marlene, who used to greet me politely, now looked at me as if I were the devil himself. Some neighbors took her side, others remained neutral, and a few understood that I was also a victim of the situation. The street became a silent battlefield, full of sideways glances and whispered comments. It was when I decided to investigate the history of that lot more deeply that things got even more interesting. I went to the registry office, researched municipal archives, talked to old neighbors, and discovered a plot that could make a movie. The original lot was gigantic, belonged to a man named Joaquim Santos, who died in the late 1990s. This Joaquim Santos had 3 children who didn't speak to each other. When he died, instead of doing the formal division, they simply divided the lot on the basis of everyone takes a piece. One of the children sold the part where my house is today, another sold the part where Mrs. Marlene lives, and the third kept a piece for himself. The problem? When making the deeds, there was confusion, and my deed ended up covering the entire lot. Even more intriguing, I discovered that I wasn't the first owner to go through this. The man who sold me the house also didn't know he owned the entire lot. He lived there for 12 years, and when he sold to me, he sold only the house and the lot where it's built. Neither he nor I ever imagined that the property was much larger than it seemed. When I added it all up, I came to the conclusion that was in the title of this script. I had owned that entire lot for 20 years, counting from the first purchase by my predecessor. 20 years, and no one had ever noticed. Mrs. Marlene was paying property tax on a lot that wasn't hers. I was paying property tax on a property that was much larger than I imagined, and the municipal agencies never noticed the discrepancy. The most ironic thing of all, if Mrs. Marlene hadn't reported me, I probably never would have discovered this. She, trying to harm me, ended up revealing that I owned a property much more valuable than I imagined. Life really has these ironies. After months of tension, legal consultations, and sleepless nights, I came to the conclusion that there were two options: file a repossession action, which would be a long and traumatic process for everyone involved, or find an amicable solution that would benefit everyone. I chose the second option. I approached Mrs. Marlane again, this time accompanied by my lawyer, and proposed the following. I would do the definitive regularization of the situation, officially dividing the lot and transferring to her the ownership of the part where she lived, in exchange for her bearing the registry costs of the operation and withdrawing the complaint against me. It was a fair proposal. She would have the legal security she never had, and I would keep my part without headaches. Her reaction was surprising. After consulting her family and her own lawyer, she accepted. Actually, she was relieved, because she would finally have the definitive deed to the house, where she had always lived. The process wasn't simple. It involved area rectification, subdivision, new deeds, and paperwork that only those who have gone through it know what it's like. But after 6 months, everything was resolved. The most gratifying thing was seeing the relationship with the neighborhood normalize. Mrs. Marlane, who initially saw me as a villain trying to evict her from home, came to see me as someone who could have been much stricter and chose a humane solution. Today, our relationship is better than it ever was. She even gave me seedlings from her garden to plant into my yard. This whole experience taught me lessons that no financial education or real estate investment course ever taught me. First lesson: always do a complete topographic survey when buying a property. I know it seems like unnecessary expense, but it can avoid surprises like the one I had, both positive and negative. Second lesson: real estate documentation problems in Brazil are much more common than we imagine. Throughout the process, I discovered dozens of similar cases in the region where I live. Lots sold twice, deeds that don't correspond to reality, boundaries that exist only in practice, but not on paper. It's a generalized mess that results from decades of lack of adequate control. Third lesson: not always the neighbor who seems to be harming you is really your enemy. Mrs. Marlane, by reporting me, ended up doing me a huge favor. If she hadn't taken that attitude, I would continue not knowing that I owned a much more valuable property, and she would continue living in a legally precarious situation. Fourth lesson: investing in an amicable solution almost always pays off more than going to judicial confrontation. The process I could have filed against Mrs. Marlane would last years, cost a fortune in lawyers, and in the end might not result in anything very different from what we achieved by talking, not to mention the emotional wear and the war climate in the neighborhood. Today, 2 years after this entire saga, I can say that that complaint was one of the best things that happened to me. First, because I discovered that my property is worth almost twice what I imagined. The lot, now properly regularized and divided, has a market value much higher than what I paid 8 years ago. Life second, because I learned the importance of having all documentation in order. I made sure to regularize not only the lot issue, but also all other aspects of the property. Today I have permits for everything I built, environmental licenses where necessary, and impeccable documentation that gives me total peace of mind. Third, because it significantly improved my relationship with the neighborhood. The story spread throughout the region, and today I'm known as the guy who could have evicted the neighbor from home, but preferred to resolve everything through dialogue. This created respect and trust I never imagined I would have. Fourth, because it made me more aware of legal issues in general. Today I read contracts more carefully, consult lawyers when necessary, and never sign anything without fully understanding the implications. That experience made me grow as a person and as a citizen. If you made it this far, you probably recognized some similar situation in your own life or in the life of someone close to you. And that's why this channel exists, to share real experiences that can help other people avoid problems or resolve complicated situations. The story I told today isn't fiction, isn't clickbait. It's the pure and simple reality of someone who went through an extraordinary situation and decided to share all the details so others can learn. And this is the type of content you find here weekly. Real stories with all the emotions, difficulties, and solutions that life presents. Subscribe to the channel because here you find authentic content. No beating around the bush, no magic formulas, just real experiences from real people who went through situations that could happen to anyone. Leave your like if this story was useful to you, if it made you reflect on the importance of keeping your documentation in order, or if it simply entertained you during these minutes. And most importantly, share your own experience in the comments. Have you ever been through a similar situation? Have you had surprises with property documentation? Have you ever discovered that your properties were different from what you imagined? Your stories can help other people who are going through similar situations. Remember, shared knowledge is multiplied knowledge. The story you have to tell might be exactly what someone needs to hear today. So don't forget, subscribe, like, comment, and see you in the next video with another real story that can change your perspective on